So today I'm going to be talking about Grimm's Law and Verner's Law. So Grimm's Law came first, as we see here. It came to be back in the 19th century, back just after Western linguistics started to really get its feet on the ground. One of the works that was noted to be like one of the first major works of actual scientific linguistics in the Western world was actually by the brothers Grimm. They wrote this Deutsche Grammatik, which was like a Germanic grammar, because back then, obviously, there wasn't necessarily one unified Germany. But basically, what Grimm's Law tried to do was to draw connections between the old languages with their obvious counterparts in the modern world and, recent history. So, with English, for example, English would be linked with Old English and Middle English and then Old English. And then Old English would be linked with Gothic, Old Gothic, and eventually Latin, and eventually Greek. The thing is, this first quote-unquote sound shift analysis, it was pretty limited because, linguistics was still in its infancy at this point. We hadn't had a lot of people looking at this, let alone, resources going into all of it. So we had some things going on like this. So basically theorized that there was kind of a one-to-one transition that would happen, and any inconsistencies they didn't really have like a strong way of explaining it. So we would have things like foot, which came from fot, which came from pes, and in a roundabout way they would be able to explain exactly how that happened. Same with tres, becomes treo, becomes probably treo, and that becomes tre, and that becomes thre, and then three, right? As the e sound starts to be pronounced as e, and also as the tre becomes pronounced as thre, that kind of shift. This isn't inconsistent with Verner's Law. Verner's Law, I think, just for the most part adds on top of and somewhat modifies some of these ideas. Same here with colis. Colis becomes hill, and here becomes hill, and here becomes hill. The whole Great Vowel shift thing, of course, but basically the k sound becomes a ch sound or a h sound. Same here, a te becomes a the, and a pa becomes a fa. And here, qu became a hu, which then eventually became just wu, right? So we've got quote, quod became quot, probably became hot, became what, and what became what, and what eventually became what. We just cut that out. So this is a fairly decent way of explaining how Grimm's Law thought about things. It was this kind of direct movement. Obviously it branched off in several directions. So like foot would become fuss in the more German side of things, then foot in the more English side of things, which would eventually turn into foot and Fuß, like Fußball. Then, we can see this also. Some kind of similar things happening with the way that Latin turned into French, and how French words, and kind of, you can see the relation between English and French. Like pied, you can see how that, the P becomes an F eventually, the D becomes a T eventually, and the vowels, they just follow suit. Obviously there's its own thing with vowels, but trois, and you can see trois becomes tre, becomes thre, becomes three. Cœur, the k becomes ch, so it'd be cœur, her, then eventually hers. You know, slowly the T, this phantom T starts to form until eventually you end up with heart, which to us sounds nothing like cœur, but you can start to see it once you see these patterns. Same with don. Don becomes, you know, it used to be like dent or something like that, and you think turn dent into tent, and tent into tunt, and start to drop the N at the end because toot, and toot becomes tooth. So, yeah, 10th, which is interesting. Grain, corn. I don't know, that one's kind of difficult, but same. Frere from vroter, brother, brother. So it's just a brief outline of how things work. Here's another example. So here looking at just kind of how things are going in some of these sound changes. So like a b sound would become a p, d would become a t, g would become a k, stuff like that. So like do would become the would become the, and things like that. Hot becomes hot. Things of that sort. And if we go to Verner's law, so Verner's law is kind of a fleshed out version of Grimm's law. It came from this article apparently in the Zeitschrift für Vergleichende Fachforschung by Verner. And basically he had noticed that there were inconsistencies with the ways that things happened, like for example how S could become R sometimes and things like that. And so he was also able to link Sanskrit with Germanic through those through the family tree basically of Proto-Indo-European, which the thing that would become Proto-Indo-European. So you know, things like here pita, which they said came or was corresponded with father, but which also came from brother. No, not brother, sorry. Pita was the Sanskrit word, which was similar to father or father. And then same with brother here, it was like vratar or bratar, which became brother, which is interesting. So here we have some examples of Verner's law in Gothic as well. So, you know, your F becomes B, H becomes G, whatever the heck this is becomes W. I don't know, it's RV or what exactly that is. Th becomes D, S becomes Z, things like that. Guomans becomes Guomanos, things like that. Here we've got kind of an example of just how there's extra nuance here. So like P becomes F in Grimm, but it can be F or V in Verner. T becomes Th, but it can be Th or the in Verner, etc., etc. S and Z for S, for example. I think there was somewhere it became D as well. Another example, pater in Latin becomes father. And obviously that becomes father eventually. And rhoticism. Reisian becomes redan. And over here you can see septem becomes selfen, becomes 7, becomes 7, things like that. Just talking voiceless and voiced fricatives and things like that, and just some other little things that might have gotten missed. It's the same with voiceless stops like this. This is really common for dialects in general, but also just for main languages. But when you have a voiceless stop, I mean, it's really easy for those to shift because they're just so soft, I guess is a good way to put it. It's like when you're first learning a new language, a lot of the times it's really hard to catch voiceless stops. Like if I say, Pyeongtaek, maybe you might not know what the last letter of tek is, right? I guess that's a bad example, but Pekhu here becomes Fehu, Tres becomes Thres, Kornu becomes Chaurn, because, Chaurn, the K becomes K, becomes just K. And then, they kind of dropped the U at the end there. Same with Tres. Tres becomes Tres, becomes Tres, becomes Tres. Eventually it even will drop the S and become Thre and becomes three, right? So, just some interesting stuff. Same with here. Augo becomes Augo, becomes Eya. Ega, which becomes Eya, becomes I. So that's some interesting stuff here. So yeah, this is I guess one more thing. Yeah, so even some things that might seem really out there, like how does centum or centum become 100, right? But ken becomes ken, ken becomes hen, becomes hen. And the hen, hun, that kind of thing can shift pretty easily. Same with centum, centum. So, the red, I'm not sure exactly where that comes from, but it's a lot easier to make these linguistic connections when you have all of the benefit of Verner's law, all of the specifics of Verner's law. You're able to draw a lot of connections between different words in different languages and how they moved over time. Thihan becomes theun, thoch becomes tha, becomes thea. Thungun becomes thigun, becomes thugun. It's quite interesting stuff. So yeah, that's a brief but slightly beat around the bush explanation of Verner's law and Grimm's law. Basically, to summarize, they are kind of just sound change analysis systems that allow us to better explain how the sounds of language changes over time, but also to draw those dots, to make those connections between the different, aspects of language from these different languages from one to another, so that we can see, for example, that, Sanskrit gave this to Greek, gave this to Latin, gave this to Gothic, gave this to, I guess to, Old Germanic / Old Norse, gave this to this and that and the other, and eventually it landed on modern English. So, and the multiple dialects of modern English obviously interpret these in different ways, but yeah, these two laws became the foundation for modern English linguistics and European linguistics, but also for our modern definitions of what the European language trees look like. So, thank you. I hope this was informative. Have a good one.